All right, so thus far we've looked at a couple different data types. We looked at integers, we looked at floats, and how to do different mathematical calculations on them. We looked at strings and how to print them, how to use input, how to format them, adding them together, that kind of a thing. By that I mean concatenation. And we should have just finished our first in-class exercise. Hopefully you've attempted that. This should be what your output ultimately kind of looks like. But if that's not what it looks like yet, that's okay. We're still working it, figuring it out. Should be all right. We'll keep going. We have if statements is going to be the next thing we look at. And if statements are really some of the bread and butter of programming. Most languages have if statements of some sort. And what this does is it says, if something is true, then do something else. If that is not true, then don't do that thing. Okay? So imagine you wake up in the morning, you look outside, and you look at the weather, right? If it is raining, then you put on a raincoat. If it is sunny, don't put on a raincoat, right? Maybe you put on sandals or something instead. And you can tell your code what to do if certain conditions are met. In the same way that you look outside and look at the weather and you think, oh, you have to check. You know what I mean? So that's what we're going to be working with here. Okay? So we have our truth tree here. And we have some ways of connecting some dots. First thing I want to do, though, is just do something simple. So I'm going to say num1 equals 5. And I'm going to say if num1 is equal to 5. Now what this is doing here, we have two equal signs. I'm not setting a variable here. That's different. This was setting a variable. This was saying that num1 contains the data of 5. This, however, is asking if the data contained in num1 is both the value and data type of this. That's why we have the two equal signs. Okay, it's actually checking two things. Is it, because I could have that, and this will not actually end up being true. So it's going to say, is it the number 5 and is it an integer? And if this is true, okay, then we're going to do something else. Okay, so now if I run this, it prints this is true. Pretty cool. Now what if I change this to the number 6? Okay, I'm going to stop the cell, I'm going to rerun it, and now nothing prints because this is not true, right? It's not equal to 5. Or I could have this be equal to 6 and have this one as a string, and it still shouldn't print, okay? Because it needs to be the same data type, okay, which is really useful. Again, computers are great tools. We just have to be very precise about what it is that we tell them, okay? So now we have that. There's more we can do, though. So we're going to do an else, okay? And that just means if this is not true, right? So if it is true, then do this thing. But if this right here is not true, then we're going to do something else, okay? So we're going to print, look, I'm not going to do that. We're going to have that thing was not true. It is false, okay? So now when I run it, it says this is true. But if I change this back to 5, so now num1 does not equal to 6 in any way, okay? Now I run it, it says that thing was not true. It is false, which is really useful. Really useful. Now, other things we can do here. We can have another number. And we're going to say if num2 is equal to num1 and num2 are equal. Okay? Then what we're going to say is equal values. Otherwise, we're going to say not equal. And now when we run it, it says they are not equal. But if I change it to 5, now it says they're equal values. So that's kind of what we're working with here. That's how the if-else things works. Now, what if you want to have a third option, right? What if you look outside and it could be raining or sunny or snowy? What if? Well, then we have elif, okay? So we're going to write another if-else statement here. So we have if num2 is greater than or equal to num1, print, print num2 is greater. That should be like that. Elif num1 is less than num2. Then we're going to print, if num1 is greater. There we go. Then we're going to print num1 is greater. We could have if they're equal, because that would be the only other case, right? One's going to be bigger than the other one, or they're going to be equal. So then we're going to have print equal values. I'm going to comment this out. Okay, and so what's going to happen is as we run our code, okay, so we set our variables, num1 is 5, num2 is 10, but as we get down here, it's going to ask, is this true? Is this a true statement? If num2 is, in fact, greater than num1, it will print num2 is greater. If that's not true, then it won't do this, and it will keep moving on. Then it says, if this is true, if num1 is greater than num2, then it will print num1 is greater, okay? But if this is not true, it will continue to go to the next line, and we have else, which will encapsulate all other scenarios, and then it will print equal values. So let's run this and see what it says, okay? So right now it says num2 is greater because 10 is greater than 5. So obviously, this was the first one that happened, and it was true. But what happens if I switch these? Let's see what happens. So now we got 5 and 4. So now num1 is greater. This is no longer a true statement. It's going to move on to line 21 and check this. It's going to skip this whole piece of code. Actually, it's not. It's going to look at this, see that it's false, and it's going to skip this line of code. And then it's going to move on to line 21 and see if that's true. And now it will say num1 is greater. And of course, if they are equal, this will not be true because one's not greater than the other. Same with this one, and it should print equal values. There you go. So that's how if statements work. Now, we can also do multiple things on these. So the way that this will work, we have if something is true and something is false, okay, then it will ultimately render as false. So we're going to have, so if num2 is greater than num1, so this is a true statement, and we can do and num3 is greater than 0. So here we have num3 equals 0. So now this is true, but this is false. What will end up happening is this will not run because one of them is false, so the whole statement counts as false. That's what this line here means, right? If one's true and one's false, then the whole statement renders false. If they're both true, then that equals true. Okay? So right now, as this stands, num3 is not greater than 0, so this line won't happen. It will continue going down to here. It should print equal values. Now it's mad. Why are we doing this? There we go. JavaScript moment. So, in Python we can just use our words, right? So we can use and. Alternatively, we could have or, which is what these are, okay? And in that case, if this is true or this is true, okay, if one is false but the other one's true, this will ultimately end up being true, as we can see here, okay? True or, that's what these two pipes mean. True or false, one of them is true, so that will end up ultimately rendering true. Same with the opposite, but if they're both false on the or statement, then they will ultimately come out as false, and this won't run. So now this will end up printing num2 is greater. Even though this isn't true, okay, if either of these is true, then it will end up running this. So that's a little bit about how that works. I could make them both false, and that line won't run, because this is false and this is false. And if either one is false, then obviously, then it renders false. So that's a little bit about if statements, how that works. Becoming familiar with this stuff is very valuable. Highly recommend playing around with it on your own a little bit, seeing how these things work. You could even do it with just one statement. We'll get rid of the second statement here, the elif, right? Okay, and we just say this here just so that you know that this other line happened, right? That whatever criteria you put in here ultimately did not render true in any way, and then it will say you are here, right? But being able to play around with some of this stuff, so now num3 is greater than 0, so when I run it, it will say num2 is greater, even though that's not true. You can say this ran, or you are here, that kind of thing. Just so that you know where things are and what's happening using different print statements and messing around with the trueness of each of these statements over there, going back and forth. All right, next we have the is word, right? So this kind of replaces, you could use this in some situations instead of the double equals, but it's not recommended. The is keyword, here, I'm actually going to write a comma here. The is keyword is for checking for the same object, but not the same value, right? So we have num3 equals 55. If num3 is 55, print this is the exact number or object. Let's play around with this a little bit. Let's see what happens if I have this instead. Oh no, it's mad. What if I just do this? Will it work now? Yeah, so it's still upset. I think Python's moving away from using is, and I've seen places where they kind of chew you out for using that. So it's something you should be familiar with, but if you're going to use it, I highly recommend looking up the specifics on how to use that. Because it did print, but we also got a whole lot of warnings, which aren't errors, but they are warnings. So just be careful, because you could also have this instead, and then all those warnings will go away. Seems like they're moving away from using the is thing. We have in. This is very useful as well, because this will check if a character is in a string. So here we have character name equals Frodo Baggins. If Frodo in character name, print the ring bearer. Okay? And this will check and see if that's in there. Now if I change this to Samwise, it doesn't happen. See how that works? So if we have Frodo in here, then we get Frodo Baggins, and off it goes. Right? Then we have the not in character keyword. And actually this is two keywords. This is not and in. This is actually two things. So we can have Sega character is Sonic. And then we can have if a not in Sega character, we're going to print a is not here. And this will end up being true, because it is a true statement to say that a is not in Sonic's name, right? That is a true statement. Even though we're using not, that doesn't make it a false statement. It just says, hey, it's not here. It's a true thing to say that there is no a in the name Sonic. So when we print it, or we run it, it ends up printing out a is not here. So, in class exercise 2, you're going to ask a user for input. You're going to check to see if the letter P is in the input, right? So whatever our user gives for our input, sorry, just that word input seems like it might be a hint. Anyways, you're going to ask for that input, and you're going to see if the letter P is in what they give you. So, there you go. That's a little bit more Python. See you after in class exercise